How do I know if I'm trying to follow the inspiration of my soul in making a decision and I feel an impulse in a certain direction? How do I know if that feeling is coming from my soul or my personality? That is not, there's no trick to this, by the way. There's no like, oh, let's talk for half an hour about that, and then that'll be solved. The path, the wisdom that we gain on the spiritual path that results in mastery is that. Mastery is perfecting, knowing the answer to that, how to tell the difference between your soul and your personality. In fact, a master's so learned that difference that they've so established themselves in their soul that they've largely exhausted the personality's influence, and it's been transformed and liberated. And it's a very, very subtle and minor influence, because inevitably you incarnate into a human personality and body. There's going to be some residual, but you can be so centered in soulfulness as to largely cancel that out, and kind of neutralize that. So there isn't any simple feeling. If I were to, say something, since we're on this topic as an example, one of the things that, as we cultivate simple spiritual practices like the one we just did, where we were, part of the meditation was cultivating a sense of just calm, accepting, and contented presence. As we become more familiar with soul, we'll recognize how it shows up in our personality, so that when we have soulful feelings, we'll say, oh, that's got the same vibration I've become familiar with as my soul. It has the same signature. It's peaceful. It's not uptight. It's not frantic. It's not striving. It's not attached. It's not stressed. It's calm. It's joyous. People are different, so you can't look always for the same signature. Some people aren't going to feel joy in their inspiration. Other people might. Other people will. So we learn about this. We learn about ourselves, and we get to know our soul nature. And so suddenly when we feel an impulse in the moment, we'll have the clarity to say, I understand where that came from. That's my soul. So we go through this phase where we can't just always trust our feelings. We have to discriminate. We develop an intuitive wisdom to know which impulses are coming from where. And then when we do notice impulses that come, feelings, desires, inclinations that arise, at different levels of our nature that do come from our personality, then we know how to relate to them. We don't have to condemn them. We don't have to judge them, but we can be discriminating about them and say, okay, I accept that this is present. I recognize what it is, and I hold that in my heart as well. But I'm not gonna choose to go with that impulse here. I know what that. I'm getting more and more familiar with what the outcome of that will be, and it's not going to lead to consequences I'm looking for. And so I'm going to find a place to keep working with and healing and transforming this aspect, but I'm not going to keep acting it out. So we just get wiser about noticing that difference. So some types of ways of talking about living from a deep space of spiritual inspiration can have more of a, what should we call it, a mental flavor. For instance, when we use terms like purpose or the plan, God's will, or my spiritual will, or intention. Intention's a good example of this. Or even all the kind of words that cluster around willing, like decision making and reflection before a decision, deliberation, those kind of qualities. All of that, tends to have kind of a more mental flavor. But there's other styles, and some people can mix it up too. People can go into that planning mode, and they can also act from feeling as well. But in that context of learning to trust our feeling nature, as with the other as well, doesn't matter which side you are cultivating or leaning towards, or is your natural way. there's still a process of discrimination that happens. And I'm sure we all know of examples in our own lives or in the lives of people that we know where clearly we all make mistakes in this way. We all sometimes think something came from an inner source of inspiration or arose in our experience as an inspiration, an intuition, an inspired impulse or a guidance of some sort. And then it turns out that we were mistaken. It's part of the path. These things happen. It's kind of how we learn. And so it's important to have this kind of clarity. One of the reasons I talk a lot about right at the moment, this feeling side, is because it is an important aspect. Many times for many people who are kind of more attuned to the feeling part of their soul than the mind, clarity, wisdom side of their soul, it's ultimately sort of like the bottom line. Like even if one does get an inspiration or an idea, one might sort of take it back into the feeling level and say, how does this sit with me? How does it resonate? Does it resonate with my feelings, my heart, my gut? And that's kind of a way, you know, if we've gotten to know ourselves well enough to know what that feeling, intuition feels like, then we can use it to make those determinations. But we have to be careful. It's a gradual process developing that wisdom. And to some extent, it requires a certain increasing amount of transformation of our personality. Because on the spiritual path, our personality becomes illuminated and integrated and healed and transformed by soul, by wisdom and spiritual qualities. And so as it does, it's as if the content of our personality gradually shifts and moves more in the direction of a greater portion of our personality is resonating with our soul. And so that, in a sense, part of what that means is more soul is incarnating in our lives. So if we're at a stage in our spiritual growth where 65% of our personality is still resonating with samsara, and only 35% with soulfulness, that's still not bad compared to average humans these days. But it's like a smaller reflecting area. It's like if you're trying to attune to your soul and get clarity and direction, for instance, it's kind of like the better part of your personality doesn't understand that and doesn't resonate that, and might even try to interfere with that. And so it's a little bit harder at that stage to know inspiration from your soul or from deeper levels of consciousness than if it's tipped the other way. When you get to 65% of your personality is in harmony with your soul, then you have this much bigger reflecting area, and the interference of the less enlightened part of your nature, or just the cloudiness of it, the distraction is less. So obviously, the more, one way in a sense to gain greater ability to live a life that's inspired more from your soul and make decisions that are inspired is practice enough on the spiritual path to go through enough transformation that you can get more of your personality in attunement with your soul, so you can more reliably understand your soul's inspiration. So luckily, we don't really need to have attained that level to be on the path, because a lot of the basics of the path don't require us getting that clarity from our souls. If we just have simple experience ourselves of, oh, when I practice in my day-to-day life being more forgiving, being more understanding, I feel better. It's that. So I do this practice, and I don't need to have a particular experience of my soul affirming that I want to do that. I know I want to do that as an incarnate being. And so even though it can be of positive value to be able to receive inspiration or recognize inspiration from our within, it's not necessary. And in fact, it's usually a good idea to be patient about that and really kind of get our feet firmly established on a grounded way of understanding the path, make progress on that level, and let our intuitive wisdom gradually grow and get more clarity. And then as that does, our ability to discriminate the difference between our soul and our personality gets clearer and clearer. And then we can more readily recognize not only guidance from ourselves, our own inner nature, but potentially from other beings, archangels, inner sages, and so on.